I didn't plan to ruin my sister's biggest night, but the moment I saw his face on that screen, I knew there was no going back. The room was silent. Not the polite kind of silence you get at events like this. This was the kind that makes people stop breathing. My sister Olivia stood frozen near the stage, one hand still wrapped around a champagne glass she hadn't touched in 10 minutes. Her fiancé, Daniel, had already taken a step forward, his smile tightening into something sharp and controlled. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the crowd. "My sister invited me here to celebrate her success," I said, adjusting the microphone slightly. "But I think everyone deserves to see how that success was built." A ripple moved through the room. Daniel let out a short laugh, like he was trying to smooth things over. "Ethan, this isn't funny." I nodded once, calm and steady. "You're right," I said. "It's not." I pressed the button. The screen behind me flickered to life, and just before the video started playing, I paused. Because to understand what everyone was about to see, you'd have to understand how we got here. I'm Ethan. I'm 34, and for most of my life, I've been the easiest person in my family to overlook. Not because I didn't exist, not because I didn't try, but because I wasn't her. Olivia, my older sister, the one my parents always described as going places. She had a way of owning every room she walked into. She didn't just talk, people listened. She didn't just plan things, people followed. Growing up, that kind of presence meant everything in our house. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in his room, the one who asked too many questions, the one who didn't quite fit into the version of success my parents understood. By the time we were adults, the roles were already written. Olivia built things people could see. I worked on things people didn't understand. I'm a cybersecurity analyst. I specialize in identifying risks, finding weaknesses in systems before they become real problems. But if you ask my parents what I did, they'd say, "He works with computers." And if you asked Olivia, she'd smile and say, "He overthinks things for a living." It wasn't cruel, not openly. That's what made it harder to fight. It sounded like truth. Sunday dinners were where everything stayed exactly the same. Same table, same conversations, same invisible lines no one talked about, but everyone followed. That night felt no different, at least at first, until Olivia walked in with Daniel. "This is him," she said, like she was unveiling something she'd been waiting to show off. "The one I told you about." Daniel shook my dad's hand first, firm, confident, practiced. Then my mom, then me. His smile shifted just slightly when he got to me. Not dismissive, just evaluating. "So you're Ethan," he said. "I've heard a lot." Something about the way he said it didn't feel like a compliment. We sat down, and as always, everything revolved around Olivia. Her company, her growth, her upcoming launch event, the same one we were now standing in weeks later. Daniel fit into the rhythm effortlessly. Same energy, same language. Numbers, expansion, visibility. Everything had to be visible. Everything had to look like success. I focused on my plate. That's how I usually got through these dinners. Stay quiet, stay out of the way, let them have their moment. But that night, Daniel turned to me. "So," he said, leaning back slightly, "Olivia told me you work in cybersecurity?" I nodded. "Yeah." "What does that actually look like?" It sounded like a normal question. "I analyze systems," I said. "Look for vulnerabilities. Try to predict where things might break before they do." He tilted his head. "Before they do?" "Yeah." He smiled. "So you solve problems that haven't happened yet?" I could already see where this was going. In a way, I said. He let out a quiet laugh. That's interesting. I waited. Then he added, almost casually, so basically, imaginary problems. There was a brief pause. Then Olivia laughed. Not loudly, just enough. He's always been more theoretical, she said, reaching for her wine. My dad chuckled. I've always said, he added, you need something tangible, something real. My mom nodded in agreement. Something stable. I felt my grip tighten slightly around my fork. I prevent losses, I said. Financial, operational. Daniel cut in again. But those losses haven't happened yet, right? I looked at him. Not if I do my job right. He smiled wider this time. Right. So no one really sees the value. There it was. Not an insult. Something cleaner, more socially acceptable, which made it worse. Olivia leaned slightly toward him. That's why I always tell him, she said, glancing at me, he should try applying that thinking to something bigger. Like what? I asked. She shrugged. Something that actually scales. The table laughed, not cruelly, just comfortably, like this was expected, like I was expected to take it. Daniel raised his glass. To growth. Everyone followed, except me. I didn't lift mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt something else, something sharper. Because it wasn't just what he said, it was how he asked. The questions were too precise, too targeted. What kind of systems do you usually work with? He asked next. I didn't answer right away. Why? I said. He smiled again. Just curious. I held his gaze a second longer than usual. Then I gave him a vague answer. Enterprise-level risk systems. He nodded, but I could tell. He wanted more. And that's when something clicked. At first, I thought it was just arrogance, just another guy who liked hearing himself talk. But the way he asked, the way he listened, he wasn't just making conversation. He was collecting information. A few nights later, I was still thinking about it, which wasn't normal. I usually let things like that go. That was my role. Absorb, ignore, move on. But this felt different. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I paid attention. To him, to Olivia, to what they were building. Her company had been moving fast, faster than I remembered. New investors, new direction, new momentum. And the direction looked familiar. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. There are only so many ways to build a system. Ideas overlap. It happens. But then I saw a preview document, not meant for me, something public-facing, a pitch outline. Just a glimpse, but it was enough. The structure, the logic, the approach. It mirrored something I had been working on for over a year. Not identical, but close enough to make my stomach drop. And then the message came. No name, no introduction, just a subject line. Be careful. I almost deleted it, but something stopped me. I opened it. There was only one sentence inside. They're not building anything new. I stared at the screen, then leaned back slowly. Because suddenly, everything lined up. The questions at dinner, the way Olivia brushed things off, the speed of their progress. Someone wasn't just inspired. Someone was digging. and not where they were supposed to. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because I was thinking. For most of my life, I had been the one who stayed quiet, the one who let things slide, the one who didn't push back, because pushing back never changed anything. It just made things worse. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't about being overlooked. This wasn't about being underestimated. This was something else. If I was right, they weren't just disrespecting me. They were using me. And that was a line I had never had to draw before. I sat in the dark, my laptop the only light in the room. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself a different question. Not why are they like this? Not why don't they see me? But something much simpler, much clearer. What are they actually doing? And more importantly, how far are they willing to go? Because if I was wrong, I could walk away. But if I was right, this wasn't just a family problem anymore. This was something bigger, something that needed proof. And once I had that proof, there wouldn't be a quiet way out. I closed my laptop and sat there for a long moment. Then I said it out loud. Okay. Not angry, not emotional, just certain. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I was going to find out the truth. And if the truth was what I thought it was, then the next time my family expected me to play my role, I wouldn't. And that's where everything started to change. I didn't tell anyone about the message. Not Ben, not my parents, not even Olivia. I just sat with it. Because the second you say something out loud, it becomes real. And once it's real, you have to decide what to do with it. And I wasn't ready for that yet. So instead, I did what I've always been good at. I watched. Over the next few days, I stopped thinking like a brother and started thinking like someone doing a risk assessment. Patterns, behavior, intent. That's what I looked for. And the first thing I noticed was how fast everything was moving. Olivia's company had always been ambitious, but this was different. New updates every few days, new features being teased, new language in their messaging. Not just growth, acceleration. And acceleration without visible foundation is always a red flag. So I started digging. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive, just public information. Investor materials, product descriptions, interviews. And the more I looked, the worse it got. Because the system they were describing, the logic behind it, the way it identified risk, the way it prioritized decision points, it wasn't just similar. It was structured like mine. Not the surface-level idea, the architecture, the kind of thing you don't accidentally replicate unless you've seen it, or someone explained it to you. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time, I said it out loud. Okay, this isn't coincidence. That should have been enough to walk away, close the laptop, distance myself, let it go. That's what I would have done a year ago. But something about this felt different, because it wasn't just about the work. It was about how they got there, and who helped them. I kept replaying that moment at dinner, Olivia saying, "I told him a bit about your work." At the time, it sounded harmless. Now it didn't. Now it sounded like access. And access, in the wrong hands, turns into leverage. I opened my notes and started writing things down. Not conclusions, just observations, dates, statements, patterns. I wasn't trying to prove anything yet. I was trying to understand. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became. This wasn't just Daniel being curious. He had a direction, a goal, and Olivia had given him a map. I closed my notebook and stared at the wall for a long moment, because that realization didn't feel like anger. It felt like something colder, more precise. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, practical, justified. Sometimes it sounds like, "It's just business." And that's what made it dangerous, because if Olivia believed that, then she wasn't going to stop. A few days later, she called me, out of nowhere, which was already unusual. "Hey," she said, like nothing had changed. "You busy?" "Depends," I said. "What's up?" "I wanted to run something by you." That alone made my guard go up. Olivia didn't ask for input. She announced things. "What kind of thing?" I asked. "Just something we're working on. I figured you'd understand it better than Mom and Dad." There it was, that casual tone, like this was normal, like we had that kind of relationship. "Okay," I said slowly. She started explaining, high level, simplified. But even in the simplified version, I could hear it. The same logic, the same flow, just reworded, repackaged. "And we're thinking of scaling it pretty aggressively," she said. "Daniel's been pushing for that." Of course he had. "And you're comfortable with that?" I asked. There was a small pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, choosing my words carefully, "do you understand how it works?" She laughed. "Ethan, I don't need to build it myself. That's what teams are for." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, this one longer. "I trust him," she said finally. That answered everything, not because it explained the system, but because it explained her. Trust, not verification, not understanding, just trust. And trust in the wrong situation becomes blindness. "I see," I said. "You always do this," she added suddenly. "Do what?" "You question everything, like there's always something wrong." I didn't respond right away, because she wasn't wrong. That's exactly what I do. But there's a reason for that. "Sometimes there is something wrong," I said quietly. She sighed. "Look, I didn't call to argue. I just thought you'd be, I don't know, supportive." Supportive. That word landed harder than anything she'd said before, because support, in our family, had always been one-directional. "You want me to support something I don't understand," I said. "I want you to trust me." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. "You're asking the wrong person for that," I said. There was a beat of silence, then her tone shifted, slightly sharper. "You've always had a problem with how I do things." "No," I said. "I've always had a problem with not knowing how you do things." Another silence, tighter this time. "You're overthinking this," she said. Maybe I was, or maybe I wasn't thinking enough. "I hope you're right," I said. "I am," she replied quickly. "You'll see at the launch." The launch, that event, the same one I was standing in now. "I'll be there," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then maybe you'll finally understand." She hung up. I kept the phone in my hand for a few seconds longer, then set it down. And that's when I made a decision. Not emotional, not reactive, just necessary. If I was wrong, nothing would happen. But if I was right, then I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof, real proof. Something that didn't rely on interpretation, something that spoke for itself. I turned back to my laptop, opened a new file, And this time, I didn't just write observations. I wrote a plan. Not to confront, not yet, just to test. Because people who are doing something they shouldn't eventually show you. You just have to give them the opportunity. I leaned back, thinking it through step by step. Daniel wanted access, that much was clear. Not just general information, specifics, structure, internal logic. So the question wasn't if he would try something, it was when, and how far he'd go. That's when the idea started to form. Not complicated, not flashy, just effective. If someone is trying to get into something they shouldn't, you don't block them immediately. You watch how they try. You let them reveal themselves, and that's exactly what I was going to do. I built a controlled environment, isolated, safe, designed to look like a weakness, not an obvious one, just enough to attract attention. Something that would only matter to someone who knew what they were looking for. Something that would feel like an opportunity. And then, I waited. Not passively, carefully. Because this wasn't just about catching him. This was about understanding the full scope, who was involved, what they were willing to risk, and whether Olivia knew how far this actually went. Days passed. Nothing happened, which almost made me doubt everything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd built a story in my head that wasn't real. Maybe this was just overlap, coincidence, normal industry behavior. I almost shut it down, almost convinced myself to let it go. And then, something triggered. A small alert. Barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it, but I was. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. Because that wasn't random. That was intentional. Someone had found it. And they weren't just looking, they were trying. I watched the activity in real time. Slow, careful, testing boundaries. Not aggressive, not sloppy. Which meant one thing. This wasn't guesswork. This was targeted. And the way they moved through the system told me everything I needed to know. They weren't exploring. They were searching for something specific. Something they already believed was there. I didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't stop it. I just watched. Because every action they took, every step they tried, was giving me something more valuable than access. It was giving me intent. And intent is what turns suspicion into certainty. I exhaled slowly, because now, this wasn't a question anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just business. This was something else, something deliberate. And the person on the other side of that system wasn't just curious. They were trying to take something that wasn't theirs. I sat back in my chair, let the moment settle. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And more importantly, you can't pretend it didn't happen. I reached for my notebook again, but this time, I didn't write observations. I wrote one line. Clear. Final. They're in. And underneath it, I added something else. Now let's see how far they go. Because whatever happened next was going to change everything. And deep down, I think I already knew that. I didn't stop him. That was the part most people wouldn't understand. If someone is trying to take something from you, the instinct is to shut it down immediately. Lock access, lock everything. Cut them off before they get too far. But that only proves one thing, that you were right to be afraid. It doesn't prove what they were doing. And I needed that. I needed more than suspicion, more than patterns, more than that message sitting in my inbox like a warning I couldn't verify. I needed something that spoke for itself. So I let it run, carefully, controlled. Every action he took inside that system was contained. Nothing real, nothing critical. Just enough structure to feel legitimate. Just enough depth to keep him engaged. And he was engaged. That was the part that confirmed everything. Because he didn't hesitate. He didn't test once and leave. He stayed. He moved deeper, more precise, more confident. Like someone who wasn't guessing anymore. Like someone who had been told what to look for. I sat there watching the activity log update in real time. Every attempt, every path, every small adjustment. And the longer I watched, the quieter I got. Because this wasn't messy. This wasn't random. This was methodical. And methodical means intention. I leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk, eyes locked on the screen. "Okay," I said under my breath. "Show me." Minutes passed, then more. At one point, he paused. No movement, no activity, just stillness. And for a second, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe he'd backed off. Maybe he'd realized something wasn't right. But then, another action. More direct this time. A bypass attempt. Subtle, but deliberate. And that's when I knew. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't exploration. This was theft. I exhaled slowly and reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to say this out loud to. Ben. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" I didn't waste time. "I need you to look at something." That was enough for him. "Send it." I forwarded the activity snapshot. Not everything, just enough. There was a short pause on the line. Then, "Okay, that's not normal." "No," I said. "It's not." Another pause. "Do you know who it is?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't have a name. Not yet. But I had a direction. "I have a pretty good idea," I said. "Is it bad?" he asked. I looked back at the screen, watched another access attempt fail, then another, then a slight adjustment, smarter this time. "It's worse than I thought," I said. Ben let out a quiet breath. "So what's the move?" That question sat there for a second, because up until now I hadn't needed to decide anything. I'd just been observing. Now I had to choose. "We keep watching," I said. "You're not going to shut it down?" "Not yet." He hesitated. "You're sure about that?" No, I wasn't sure about anything, but I knew what I needed. "I need more," I said. "More what?" "Proof." He didn't argue. That's why I called him, because he understood the difference between reacting and building a case. "Okay," he said finally. "Then we do it right." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "We document everything." "Everything," he repeated. I ended the call and set the phone down. Then I went back to watching. Because now this wasn't just about catching him. This was about understanding the full scope. And the next part came faster than I expected. The following evening, the activity came back. Stronger, more confident, less hesitation. And this time, he wasn't alone. There were multiple access points, different patterns, different speeds, different approaches. A team. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, not anger, just clarity. This had moved past one person. This was organized, which meant Olivia didn't just mention my work. She handed it over. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, because that realization hit differently. It wasn't just about what Daniel was doing anymore. It was about her choice. And choices are harder to excuse than mistakes. When I opened my eyes again, I didn't feel conflicted. I felt focused. Because once it reaches that point, the path becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. You either ignore it or you expose it. There isn't a middle ground. And I already knew I wasn't going to ignore it. The next step wasn't emotional. It was structural. If this was going to escalate, and it would, I needed to protect myself properly. Not just technically, legally. I pulled up everything I had collected so far. Logs, timestamps, access patterns. Then I started organizing it. Not like notes, like evidence. Clear, sequential, verifiable. Something that could stand on its own. Because if this ended where I thought it might, it wouldn't just be a conversation. It would be a confrontation. And confrontation without structure turns into noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted something undeniable. That night, I barely noticed the time passing. I just kept building, layer by layer, until I had something solid. Not complete, but enough to prove intent. And that was when my phone buzzed. Olivia. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Hey," I said. "You still coming to the event?" she asked, straight to the point. "Yeah," I said. "I said I would." "Good," she replied. "It's important." Important. That word meant something different now. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I can see that." There was a pause. Then she added, almost casually, "Daniel's really excited about it. He thinks this is going to change everything." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because for once, we agreed. "It will," I said. She didn't catch it. "Good," she said. "Then I'll see you there." "Yeah," I replied. "You will." She hung up. I set the phone down slowly, then looked back at my screen, at the logs, at the patterns, at the undeniable trail that had formed over the past few days. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't questioning anything. Not her, not him, not myself. Because now I had what I needed. Not all of it, but enough to take the next step. I reached for my notebook again, flipped to a clean page, and wrote one word at the top: exposure. Then underneath it, I started outlining something else. Not a defense, not a report. A moment. A controlled environment where everything I had built, everything they had tried to take, would collide. Publicly, cleanly, irreversibly. I didn't rush it. I didn't overcomplicate it. I just asked myself one question. Where would the truth hurt the most? The answer came immediately. The launch event. The one place where everything they were building would be on display. The one place where perception mattered most. The one place where no one expected to be challenged. I leaned back in my chair again, exhaled slowly. Because once I made that decision, there was no quiet version of this story anymore. No private conversation. No controlled resolution. This was going to happen in the open. And once it did, nothing would go back to the way it was. I looked at the screen one last time, then closed my laptop. Because the next part wasn't about watching anymore. It was about timing. And I was done waiting. The video started playing. At first, most people didn't understand what they were looking at. It wasn't dramatic. No loud music, no obvious reveal. Just a screen recording, a cursor moving, folders opening, directories being tested. Quiet, technical, controlled. Which made it even more uncomfortable, because the room didn't know how to react. But I did. I watched Daniel instead of the screen, and the moment the second sequence played, when the cursor paused over the protected layer, then attempted access, his expression changed. Not panic, recognition. And that was enough. "What is this?" someone in the crowd asked. I didn't answer immediately. I let it run a few more seconds. Then the audio kicked in. Not clear at first, just fragments. Then, if we can map this structure. That was his voice, lower than usual, focused. We don't need their system. We just replicate the logic. A murmur spread through the room. Daniel stepped forward.
"This is completely out of context," he said sharply. "You're twisting."
Am I? I asked calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because now people were listening. Really listening. Olivia moved closer to him, her face pale but controlled. "Ethan, turn it off," she said. "This isn't the place." I looked at her. For a second, I almost did. Not because she was right, but because that was the role I'd always played. De-escalate, stay quiet, protect the moment. But that version of me had already ended. "No," I said, and I let the video continue. More attempts, more refined, more deliberate. Then the final clip, the one that mattered most. The cursor stopped moving, and his voice came through clearly this time. He's not going to notice. People like him never do. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. I reached forward and paused the video. Then I turned back to the room. "The system you're looking at," I said, steady and clear, "is mine." No reaction at first, just confusion. Then realization started to ripple through the crowd. I continued. "The one your fiancé was trying to access, the one he's describing copying." I glanced at Daniel. "That's what I've been building." Olivia's hand tightened around his arm. "That's not what this is," she said quickly. "You're making assumptions." "I'm not," I said. And then I did something I hadn't planned to do. Something I hadn't needed to do until that moment. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a printed document. Not dramatic, just paper, but structured, clean, organized. "I didn't come here with one clip," I said. "I came with a timeline." I held it up slightly. Access attempts, timestamps, patterns, multiple entry points. I let that sink in. "Not one person," I added. "A coordinated effort." That's when the shift happened. Not emotionally, structurally. Because now this wasn't just an awkward moment. This was evidence. And evidence changes how people listen. Daniel took another step forward.
"You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but there was a crack in his tone now. "Systems get tested all the time." "Not like that," I said quietly. He stopped, just for a second, but it was enough. That was the first crack. I didn't push harder. I didn't need to. I just placed the document on the podium. "Everything here is verifiable," I said, "and already reviewed." That part wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be, and the way I said it made it sound like it already had been. The escalation was immediate. People started shifting, whispering, looking at Daniel differently, looking at Olivia differently. Because once doubt enters a room like that, it spreads fast. Olivia stepped forward now, her voice tighter. "You're doing this because you've always resented me," she said. "This isn't about anything else." There it was, the second move. Not denial, deflection. Make it emotional, make it personal, turn the room back against me. And for a second, it almost worked. I could feel the attention shift, the uncertainty, because resentment is believable. Family tension is messy. People understand that. So I didn't argue it. I didn't deny it. I just asked one question. "If that's true," I said, looking at her, "then why does your system follow the exact same architecture as mine?"
Silence again. Not as heavy as before, sharper this time, more focused. Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. Because that question wasn't emotional. It was structural. And structure doesn't bend easily. That was the escalation. Then came the collapse. Daniel looked around the room, at the faces, at the reactions, at the distance forming around him. And something in him shifted. Not guilt, not exactly. Pressure. And pressure makes people make mistakes. "You think you own an idea?" he snapped suddenly. "You think you're the only one who can build something like that?" There it was. Not denial, admission. Not full, but enough. Because now the argument had changed. From "this didn't happen" to "it doesn't matter if it did." And that was the moment everything broke. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Because once someone starts justifying, they've already lost. The room knew it. He knew it. And Olivia? She knew it too. Her grip on his arm loosened slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just enough to show the shift. I stepped back from the microphone. Not as a retreat. As a conclusion. "This isn't about ideas," I said finally. "It's about how you got them." No anger, no raised voice, just clarity. Then I turned and stepped away from the stage. And that's when the room moved. Not all at once, but in pieces. People stepping back, breaking clusters, quiet conversations starting, distance forming. Not loud, not chaotic, just withdrawal. And that kind of reaction, it's worse than outrage. Because outrage passes, but withdrawal? That sticks. Daniel didn't follow me. Olivia didn't either. They stayed where they were, in the center of a room that no longer belonged to them. I walked past the bar, didn't stop, past the entrance, out into the night air. Cool, quiet, normal, like none of it had just happened. I kept walking until I reached the parking structure. That's where they caught up to me. Of course they did. "Ethan, wait!" My father's voice, sharp, urgent. I stopped, didn't turn around immediately, just stood there for a second, then faced them. All three of them, my parents and Olivia. No Daniel, not anymore. "You couldn't just talk to us?" my mom said, her voice tight with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. "Talk about what?" I asked. "This," my dad said, gesturing vaguely. "Whatever that was back there." I looked at him, then at Olivia. "She knew," I said. My mom shook her head immediately. "No, she didn't." "She did," I said calmly. And Olivia didn't deny it. That was the part that mattered. "She trusted him," my mom said instead. There it was, the justification. The same one that always came. Different situation, same pattern. "She chose him," I corrected. Silence. My dad stepped forward slightly. "You embarrassed this family," he said. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "No," I said. "I didn't." I met his eyes. "You're embarrassed because you were wrong." That landed, harder than anything else I'd said, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional. It was just true. Olivia finally spoke. "You could have handled this differently." I looked at her, really looked this time. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see my sister. I saw someone who had made a choice. "I did," I said. A pause, then quieter. "You just didn't expect it." No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to say. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was a line. And once it's crossed, you don't step back over it. You walk away. So I did. I got into my car, started the engine, and as I pulled out of that parking structure, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't even feel relieved. I felt something simpler. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clear. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to my family. I wasn't trying to be understood. I wasn't waiting for them to see me differently. I had already seen everything I needed to. And that was enough. 6 months later, nothing looked the same. Not for them, and not for me. Their company never recovered, not publicly, not officially. But the shift was obvious. Partnership slowed, momentum disappeared. And the story never fully went away. People remember things like that. Not the details, but the feeling, the doubt. And once that's there, it doesn't leave. I didn't follow it, didn't check updates, didn't ask questions, because I didn't need to. That part of my life was over. Mine, on the other hand, finally started moving forward. Not because of what happened, but because of what I stopped carrying.
The need to be accepted. The need to be understood. The need to fit into something that was never built for me. I built my own work, quietly, properly, with people who didn't need me to explain my value before they saw it. And that made everything simpler, cleaner, lighter. Sometimes people ask me if it was worth it, if exposing them like that changed anything. And the answer is always the same. It didn't change them. It changed me. Because I didn't win that night. They didn't lose. That's not how it works. What happened was something else. Something quieter, more permanent. I stopped playing a role that was never mine. And once you do that, everything else falls into place. Not immediately, not perfectly, but honestly. And honestly, that's more than enough.